Benjamin Heidersberger, der AKS von EMS, Analog Synthesizer, Lecture Performance, das ist unser Genre hier. This massive piece has been transferred from the signal laboratory, which is now more turned into a seminar room, into the Media Archaeological Fundus, because, as it is said here, this is an analog thing. This is the first computer producing a video game. Most people think video games have always been digital, but it's the first one. Tennis for Two has been performed on a so-called analog computer, which is not programmed symbolically by algorithms, but patched electronically like a musical synthesizer. And there has been no pixel screen, but the oscilloscope on which, if we now would restore it into operative patch, show how the ping pong ball of Tennis for Two can be directed from left to right and back. I would be tempted to switch it on and to show it in operation, because this is the main idea, not to show dead objects, just a piece of metal, but to show it as a medium, because our media theory is that we can talk about an artifact being a medium only when it is processing signals. But this machine needs repatching, which is a bit delicate. So we have sometimes students who do it as part of their seminar papers or bachelor thesis to make it become operative again and actually play the video game, the first video game on an analog computer. This piece has been on exhibition in the Computer Game Museum of Berlin. I'm still proud that even to the public, this university collection here has an appearance. And to finish with an anecdote, this place here is not only in philosopher Hegel's former house, but it's opposite of the Museum Insel, the museum island of Berlin, literally opposite of the Pergamon Museum. And I always say there is the old antiquity, classical cultures, archaeological culture, and now these media pieces here are the new antiquity. This is now media archaeology, and visitors who want to visit the museum island here sometimes stop at this place. They think this is part of the museum island of Berlin, and they spontaneously enter this space. It shows that media, even if they are so-called new media, and most of the media have been until recently very new, have already the appeal of a mix of nostalgia, curiosity, archaeological awareness, collector's pride. It has an appeal to which this place hopefully answers. The end of the world, vibrant matter. Das sind ja so diese Themen. Der New Materialism ist das große Stichwort für ein großes Stichwort in der aktuellen Medientheorie. New Materialism. Das Interesse an, dass die Materie, that matter is not only passive. Matter can be active, and that brings it close to the idea of technology. Karen Barrett, who comes from quantum physics, or Jane Bennett with vibrant matter and other works, have a new interest in the embodiment of reason. And for that, technology is a special way of experimenting the relation between matter and reason. The old divide, which has been there in the Occidental cultures between body and mind, can be discussed in new ways when they both meet as technologies, because this is a confrontation of matter, physical matter, and logical mind. And this is a unique way of experimenting this relationship, which is driving curiosity in Europe for 30,000 years, since the early days of Greek philosophy. The Christian theology again discussed the mind-body question, and technology now is another variance of body or mind confronting matter. And it can be experimented, it can be verified, it functions, it does not function. It's not reduced to human thinking only, technology itself thinks it as well. So we have very old ontological basic questions which can be discovered in the most technical thing. And the closer we research and open technologies, the more philosophical they become. So there is no divide between engineering skills on the one hand and thinking philosophically about technology, but it becomes entangled. And I see a lot of so-called object-oriented ontology and other philosophical avant-garde movements of the present who can be involved into this kind of media theory. So this place here, although it looks like a collection of dead media, is deeply involved in the most current intellectual debates about the mind-matter relations that take place in the form of technology. Well, yeah. Mm-hmm. Das ist von den Elektronenröhren. Licht ist selbst eine aktive Materie. Licht ist nicht nur transparent. Light is not only transparent, but it's a physical event as well, because it can move little metal plates here if the light is strong enough. Now, artificial neon light is not strong enough, but sunlight would turn those metal plates around, and then we see that photons, now it moves even, we see that photons, the particles of light, are material events. Light drives this plate, and suddenly light becomes a machinic force. Radiometer, das ist der Fachausdruck, radiometer. The sphere powered by the sun. But we put it next to the electronic oscilloscope, which then becomes the basis, or is related to the vacuum tube, which was the basic element for earlier radio and the first electronic computers. So we open connections between most detailed physical media artifacts and cultural events when they are related to technology, with the risk of things being removed, put into new contexts. We are not freezing media in categories, but we, according to our new philosophical or techno-philosophical questions, those things move, build new constellations. So the Media Archaeological Fundus itself is not a museum place, but a dynamic space. And even the digital camera, which now records those moments, suddenly confronts its own alter ego in a way when we come, for example, to old video cameras. And at that moment, we become aware that the medium which records my words and those images from the Media Archaeological Fundus, that the fundus is not just the object of this recording, but the recording device itself remembers its own past or present past or even future past in being confronted with early analog or early digital video cameras. And we even allow for challenging the visitor. For example, frequently I'm asked, what is this? Why do we need a filter cigarette in the Media Archaeological Fundus? What is technological about it? But we have this old filter cigarette because to remind that the filter itself was the reason for inventing the magnetic tape, which became important for magnetic audio recording, magnetic video recording, and early computer bit storage. Because in the town of Dresden in Germany, there has been in the 1920s a very active cigarette industry, and one of the developing engineers of the filter realized that when we put metal dust on paper, which is the basic of the filter, then we can magnetize this metal on paper and thereby record voices and music, as it is known from electric telephony. So the idea of the magnetic tape was in a way invented by the cigarette industry in developing a filter. Now these are techno-cultural knowledge coincidences which show that media archaeology is not just about a linear history of technology, but unexpected events, short circuits, shortcuts can happen. And to think about media in non-linear time is one of the core models of media archaeology, as it is differentiated from traditional narrative story like media history. And that is why here this cigarette is put next to recording devices, as they are more familiar from early home magnetic recordings. And we have developed, since the so-called catalogos of the Media Archaeological Fundus, because the Media Archaeological Fundus is not simply a museum collection, but a techno-media active research place. We have not constructed a traditional inventory of technical objects, how you would find it in technical museums all over the world, but we have created a catalog which mainly gives the media archaeological reason, the knowledge element, why we acquired such an object. It's not simply as a description, a technical description of the objects, which you could easily find in other engineering places, but this catalog gives what is the philosophical reason why we acquired some of the strange objects. And that's why we call this not simply the catalog, but the catalogos. What is the reason for having this strange object, like the replica of the first flip-flop binary storage device, which has been kindly constructed by Henry Westphal, who runs an electronic company in Berlin, but his hobby is to deal with old vacuum tube technology. And he built us an operative bit. This is one bit here in the catalog. We can see it in the real version here, and we can set it into action to show how the first storage of either 0 or 1, which is the core of digital storage, was constructed by using radio vacuum tubes in a crossway circuitry. Now you see for the first time maybe a bit as a physical event. Most people think this is 0 or 1, but the computer does not know 0 or 1. The computer only knows material energy. And 1 bit was very costly in early computing times if you have to construct it with vacuum tubes like this. To make this kind of thinking transparent, we have this as a demonstration, as an operative demonstration object. It says, take care, there is a dangerous voltage, because media can be dangerous. So there is always not only an epistemological risk, but a very practical risk in trying to reoperate a so-called old medium, with our core argument being, even if this is a historical replica, when it is operated, when it functions, it's radically present. So that in a way there is no past for technologies. In the moment they process signals, they are radically present, and that's why the Media Archaeological Fundus is a challenge to the traditional ways of thinking cultural history. That's the ultimate machine. Is one of the so-called Shannon's toys. Shannon, to whom we owe the mathematical and engineering foundation of all digital telecommunication technologies we use today. But the same man, Claude Shannon, had fun in constructing toys which make this knowledge, turns it into an experience which is more playful. So we see that even mathematicians and engineers have another side in their character. And we not only collect serious media archaeological artifacts, but media archaeological toys as well. Because our media science is not only academically positivist, but all kind of research has an element of playfulness, of curiosity, of experimentation. So we have a lot of artifacts here, which at first don't make sense or look like children's toys, but they can be revealed with their deepest philosophical importance once you explain them in a way which we do, for example, with our catalogos, which is our media archaeological sense-making. Most people think, now this is the original of the foundational book of media science, which is Understanding Media by Marshall McLuhan from 1964. Most people would look at it for a moment and then read the text. But we actually put a real light bulb next to it to see how practical this theory is. Why did McLuhan put a light bulb cartoon as a front? To explain his famous theorem, the medium is the message. Pure light lightens a room. People are not aware of the technology, but only of the effect of the technology, of the light. And true media archaeological science would be to look at the real medium message behind the simple aesthetic appearance. McLuhan explains how the light bulb has changed culture, because we can, like now, work in the dark, which was impossible for mankind before. So the light bulb has subconsciously changed our rhythm of the day, of our working economy, knowledge economy. This is McLuhan's argument. We go one step further, even beyond Marshall McLuhan, and say, no, let's take this light bulb literally and say, how is the light bulb related to the vacuum tube, for example, because they were brother and sister when they were invented. How the medium of the light bulb, which was meant for enlightening a room, developed from an electric device, this is electricity, into an electronic device, because here currency is not only used for energy, for light energy, but for making voltage intelligent. That is the idea of the vacuum tube, which was succeeded then later by the transistor, which was succeeded by the microchip. Suddenly we can discuss the difference between electricity and electronics. Now these are the kind of knowledge objects and differentiations of terms which are core elements of teaching media culture as an academic discipline. So what has been text in the book becomes material, the cartoon becomes a real technical device. This is put into context, and finally the light bulb even ends with the television tube, and we can open connections between technical cultural pieces which are otherwise completely separated. So the Media Archaeological Fundus creates constellations of knowledge in new, unconventional ways, and we see how the logic of technology itself develops into differentiations, like media philosopher Gilbert Simondon wrote in his famous book on the essence of technological objects already in the late 1950s, that technology has a knowledge of its own which waits to be developed. And it's fascinating to see that the center of human culture is not only the human, but technology is a co-agency of knowledge itself. It's not only an object of knowledge, but it's a subject of knowledge. And so we come from media theoretical McLuhan to the practical artifacts, and from that back again to media philosophical reflections. We have been talking about the earliest computer game, which has surprisingly been performed on an analog computer, to make the analog computer not a forgotten medium of the past, but to reactivate its potentialities for the future. Bernd Ullmann, who is a collector of analog computers, has developed an educational toy which he called or calls the analog thing. That makes it possible for every student or whoever is interested to have his own analog computer, to learn how to patch physically, not symbolically, not algorithmically, but electronically, to patch an event again on, not on a pixel screen, but on a traditional oscilloscope, and see, for example, how waves can develop, be analyzed, differentiated mathematically. So we see that the analog computer is not an artifact from the past, but it's being rediscovered. It can be developed into an educational toy because it's worth to have the analog be remembered in a broader culture to understand why the future of computing will be quantum computing or similar developments, because they can develop, they can process signal parallel. That's the big challenge of artificial intelligence, deep machine learning. They have to work massively in parallel ways, which is different from the traditional digital computer who can only do one step at a time, one bit at a time. But the analog computer could, and in the future will do it again, process signals massively parallel, almost in real time, to use this term. And that will be the future of computing, massively real-time processes, for which suddenly the old principle of the analog computer will return in new forms. And then we have what we call a recursion. This is the time figure which does not show technical time as a time of evolution, but some things which have been almost forgotten return in new forms. And that's why the interest in media archaeology is not just nostalgic or historicist, but it's discovering the future of those past devices, like it happens with the analog thing, which becomes more and more important again with so-called artificial intelligence technologies. Der auf dem Programm hier gesteckt ist. Ist er angeschlossen? Wäre natürlich mal schön, einmal auch so ein Medium in Aktion zu zeigen. To see a medium in operation. Did we switch it on? Aber ich bin jetzt nicht darauf vorbereitet, dass es funktioniert. This one is here. I need another. Yeah, I need another source. Could be because every medium needs power, energy. It's not just a theoretical thing. Now it's switched on. And the analog thing, if it is patched correctly, but it needs adjustment, should create waveforms. I think the variables have to be changed, and the program has to be repatched, and the IC has to put, now it's on, we have a voltage, and the coefficients could be changed. I'm still not convinced that this patch makes sense. And now we come to a point which is very significant both for engineering, media archaeology. Now the play between exact technical knowledge and playful experimentation opens. That's the moment where I need the manual to know a precise patch, which can then be simply be copied. Let's say, for example, here we have the different colors to create this waveform, which would be the decay of a movement. It becomes weaker and weaker. To simulate this, what we know from every playing with a ball, to simulate this electronically would require this patch, which we could simply copy even without knowing it. That would be the logical circuit diagram for the engineers. That would be the mathematical formula, which is suddenly becomes physically real. Mathematics becomes physical with the analog computer. That would happen if I now repatched this analog thing, educational toy, to simulate the displacement of an under-damped suspension. Here, a poster which explains the core message and function of Medienarchäologischer Fundus. While, for example, a traditional art museum cares for the original, it has to be the original painting. Technical artifacts, they have not only to be the original matter, but mainly they have to function. So we have to replace parts of the original device by, for example, laser printed objects in order to make it function again. So more important than the original matter in the classical museum is the medium function, and it has to work. And that is why my colleague and the current director of the Media Archaeological Fundus, Shitao Miyazaki, explains that the operativity is more important than the classical art original value of the object. And that is why even if we simulate a medium, it's not enough just to photograph the medium, because you cannot rebuild a medium just from a photograph. You have to do a computer animated reconstruction of all the single individual parts in order to produce a replica of an old medium to make it function again. And this is this special piece, which we have as an original here on our shelves, is the so-called kymograph. It's the wave writer. You see a turning cylinder can register wave events. This was the precursor of the phonograph, but developed for medical measure, for example, of the human pulse, to make it a graphical trace. Now this can only be explained if actually the cylinder turns. Different from the classical art historical or classical archaeological object, it's not just enough to put the object like a sculpture in the room, but it has to operate, it has to work, it has to process the waves, register the waves. So the core message of this place here is to make those old medium function again. This is the only way to understand the medium, to see it in its function. So different from the traditional cultural history, where the original, the authenticity of matter is priority, here priority is the functioning of the medium, because the essence of the medium is it's a dynamic time object. That separates the Media Archaeological Fundus from the classical archaeological, cultural, historical collections, where it is enough to put the object on the shelf. And this is nicely explained at the entrance here of the fundus. But we are joking as well. Next to it, from America, this is a warning message from AT&T, the telephone company in the US. Underground cable, call before you dig. Before you archaeologically dig into the ground, make sure that you are not destroying a functioning cable. So this is media archaeology in everyday practical life. This is media archaeology and the academic, knowledge-oriented, epistemic understanding. And it's just by coincidence that this sign here says the fire flame extinguisher is placed here. So this gives a nice self-ironical introduction to the essence of Media Archaeological Fundus.